An ending that even he couldn't have expressed in words. The life of the Arab world's most celebrated poet is over. How will all those touched by the work of Mahmoud Darwish remember him? Welcome to the programme. I'm David Foster. He gave a voice to Palestinians longing for their own state. Sometimes he was even critical of his own people. On Wednesday, thousands turned out to pay their respects to the poet Mahmoud Darwish. It was the biggest funeral in the West Bank since Yasser Arafat's 4 years ago. Noor Odeh reports on a final farewell.
Mahmoud Darwish mourned in Palestine and beyond. A literary genius known for his humility arrives at the Palestinian homeland for his final journey. Received by the president and dignitaries from across the world, Darwish is honored with a state funeral, recognizing him as a national hero. It was an emotional ceremony.
Mahmoud Darwish was a teacher, a scholar, a shining light in the art of literature and excellence, the essential art for our people's course of resistance. He was a steadfast hero, sacrificing and selfless, a leader of his people on all fronts of resistance.
Darwish was remembered for his uncompromising passion for Palestine, an unmatched courage in challenging everything, including himself. A poet recognized for his invaluable contribution to the Arab language and modern poetry, Mahmoud Darwish left a universal imprint on literature, with his poems translated to over 20 languages.
People are mourning Mahmoud Darwish because they believe in his cause, they believe in his message, and he was the pulse of their conscience.
As his funeral procession started, Darwish was greeted by those who loved him most, the people. It was a ceremony full of symbolism. Next to Ramallah's cultural palace, thousands gathered to receive him at his final resting place, overlooking occupied Jerusalem, a city he dedicated so much of his poetry to. His poetry, however complex, transcended boundaries and educational divides, sung by thousands across the Arab world. One of Darwish's most memorable poems was about longing to return home to his mother, her bread and morning coffee, and confessing he feared dying before her because the thought of bringing her to tears was simply unbearable.
From all walks of life and from across the occupied Palestinian nation, they came to mourn him and bid him farewell. Mahmoud Darwish, the prince of poetry and the symbol of Palestinians' collective memory. Listening to his words about life and death, they remembered him for genius in politics and literature.
Tears and music mixed in Ramallah on Wednesday. There was plenty to say about Darwish by the many forever touched by his poetry.
He tried to simple our case in his words when he writes his poems. I love him as all the Palestinian people love him.
In death as in life, Mahmoud Darwish united Palestinians in recognizing the beauty, even in pain, reminding them always of his conviction that in Palestine there was plenty to live for. Noor Odeh, Ramallah, for Inside Story.
Now, before we came on air, I questioned whether I was the right person to do this programme. Perhaps somebody who'd grown up living and breathing Darwish's work would be better. I thought it might be a little bit like someone who'd never heard of the Beatles doing a celebration of John Lennon's life just after he was shot. But this programme, I believe, is not just for aficionados of Darwish's work, but for those worldwide who might know little of the man but want at least to know something. So I sit here ready to learn why so many have been in tears, why millions feel that they've lost somebody very special. In Ramallah, our guest tonight, Ahmed Harb, a novelist and professor at Birzeit University. In Tel Aviv, Yitzhak Laor, an Israeli poet, playwright and novelist. And here in Doha, LAMIS Andoni, a writer on Palestinian affairs. Welcome to all of you. Each one of you, I know, a friend of Mahmoud Darwish's. So I want to take a tack in this programme where you lead the discussion. I have a few questions to ask, but I really want you to interact with each other, to tell each other what you know about him, what you believed in, where it's no longer an academic dissection, where it goes beyond words. Ahmed Had, let me come to you first, if I may, appropriately enough, in the West Bank. What do you believe the world has lost with the death of Mahmoud Darwish?
I believe the world has lost a great poet, a great human being. The world lost a recognized voice for the Palestinian cause, for the Palestinian people, a voice which embodies the Palestinians' hopes, aspirations for freedom and democracy.
Would he have been a great poet if he hadn't had a Palestinian cause to write about? Must a poet feel pain to be recognized as great?
I think so. I think he could be a great poet without maybe the Palestinian cause, but it seems that, as in any case, with any poet, that the environment, the circumstance of the poet would give a recognized voice, a recognized way of expression. And in the case of Mahmoud Darwish, he gave a recognized expression for the Palestinian cause to all humanity. He achieved, through the Palestinian locality, I would say, the international recognition, and he's succeeded, I think, to extend the word to the whole world.
Lamis, you were telling me that you'd hardly slept since you heard the news of his death. You felt very, very close to him. What's the deepest pain that you feel at the moment? The loss of a great writer, an inspirational man, or a friend?
The fact that he's no longer around. We have relied on him as a poet, as a friend, as a human being, to always incite us for love, invoke the best in us, speak to our inner feelings. He was motivated by love, and he taught us that the motivation should be love for life, because if you want to struggle for justice, it cannot be motivated by hate, but it's the love for life and for humanity that should be our mover. We will miss his presence in our lives. He will miss the fact that he, at every juncture of our history, was telling us how we feel better than we could ever say. He was describing and telling our story, and telling the story of the human condition in a broader meaning better than anyone could say. We will miss his presence. I'll miss him personally. I'll miss him as a Palestinian. I'll miss him as a human being.
Ahmed, you were nodding as Lamis was expressing those sentiments. Let me ask you both, before I go to Yitzhak Laor in Tel Aviv, was he a happy man?
Perhaps not very happy.
Lamis?
Not very happy.
Well, this is why he was so influenced by the human condition. And this is part of his strength, that he couldn't be always happy, because he was able to see the abyss of life. And he would go down to the abyss and pull himself up and pulls us with them, pull our soul. He was able to pull our soul with him and see the light again. So he couldn't have been happy, and that was part of his strength, or else he wouldn't have been as sensible and sensitive to articulate our feelings and the depth of our sorrows and victories and love and anger and rebellion.
Ahmed, he reflected more on death in his later years in a particular way, didn't he?
Yes, he reflected a lot on his death, especially after 1998. And it seems that he was eulogizing himself in his late works. And he tries to philosophize the idea of death, to challenge the idea of death, as if he is saying, in other words, that you, death, will not defeat me. And through that, he's saying that death will not defeat us as people as well as individual.
Let's go to Tel Aviv. Yitzhak Laor, a fellow poet, friend of Mahmoud Darwish's. Was he your friend as a poet, as a human being, or as somebody from another country fighting about a cause?
Well, I guess that the beginning of our connection was about poetry, because he knew my poetry and he heard about my political position, so it was easier to contact each other. Yet connection was basically on the telephone, so it was not from one country to another, but he lived under brutal occupation. I live in the metropolitan of this colonial project, so telephone calls would be the most appropriate way to describe this friendship. And we did not talk about poetry on the telephone. We talked about, I asked him about his health every once in a while. He asked me about my being, and we talked about politics a lot. So one could say that that friendship was a mixture of all these things.
What did you like about him the most?
The way he used to encourage me. I mean, him in Ramallah calling me in Tel Aviv and trying to encourage me and to just to ask and to try and to see the positive side of things. Even if he didn't find much, he would ironically joke about it. I mean, he had a great sense of humor.
Now, at an early stage of his life, Darwish said, against barbarity, poetry can resist only by confirming its attachment to human fragility like a blade of grass on a wall, while armies march by. After the break, we'll be discussing the role of poetry in changing society. Stay with us, if you will.